you're talking about the dangers of revisionism when it comes to certain social categories based around the fact that there could be political agendas behind it or things like this.
Yeah.
I agree, but I'm also reminded of a Napoleon Bonaparte quote that history is an agreed upon set of lies. And so when you talk about consensus, right, this is what Napoleon Bonaparte was saying here. He was saying, well, there's a lot of consensus when it comes to history. They agree on a whole lot of things that just aren't true, right?
You know, the world has changed since the last time we spoke. And some would say for the better, some would say for the worse, some would say it's a mixed bag, which is usually what I say. What are your thoughts, man? I wanted to kind of talk about, we can talk about whatever you want to talk about. I'd love to talk about what's on your mind, what you're worried about, and what you're optimistic about. But one of the things I've been kind of talking about a lot is this new sort of phenomenon of the power of podcasts and the power of, there are a lot of people out there that love to get on a podcast and say, you're being lied to. I've done the research and everybody else is wrong and I'm right. And that can be about vaccines, that can be about Gaza, that can be about Ukraine, that can be about anything. But I'm interested in your perspective on that.
So I have a good buddy of mine. He's a podcaster. His name is Made by Jim Bob. He's a pretty well-known satirical artist, fucking hilarious guy. And he calls it the files, right? He says these guys always have a file, right? They're going to pull out the file and they're going to elucidate for you the truth, the hidden truth. They're going to reveal it in all of its entirety.
Yes.
And also pay me money, right? But I mean, that's the whole game, right? And the thing is that there's so much truth that just isn't so. Right? So much truth just isn't so. But here's what's happened in the market. Nobody trusts the mainstream media and it's dying. And it's not like, remember 10 years ago, people were like, the mainstream media is dying, blah, blah. I mean, now it's really fucking dying. It's not like it was when we were talking about it before and the ratings are down and this. I mean, they're laying off everybody. They're laying off everybody. The Megyn Kellys of the world, they're podcasting. They're not going on major news networks anymore. Piers Morgan is drafting people out of the podcast world to debate geopolitical issues. The world has changed, okay? It has completely changed. Because of that, there's a hole in the market. The old news paradigms, they knew how to regulate this, right? They've been running broadcast news for 100 years. They were running it on the radio. And then they moved over to, I think it was CNN who started the first 24-hour news network long before Fox News ever came along. And we know how to regulate the news, right? There was like some kind of checks and balances which was in there, and you could get hit with libel and get sued and all sorts of different things, right? This is the wild fucking West. Okay, this is the Wild West. Nobody knows what the regulations are. YouTube can't even tell you when you're violating the TOS. They'll just remove your channel, maybe, if you're lucky. If you're lucky, they'll just demonetize it, right? These tech companies don't seem to give you any particular rules, so nobody even knows what rules they're all playing by, right? And so that's what you have. And it feels a lot like the Wild West now with this big, massive hole, right? So Elon Musk tries to address this, and he's like, look, there's going to be a lot of fake news. If you're going to have an open market of ideas, right, and you're not paying for the moderation anymore, there's going to be a lot of fake news, and you're going to have to actually be able to put your thinking cap on again so that you can sift through what's nonsense and what isn't. In some ways, I think it's actually good for society that you have to now think instead of just having it spoon-fed to you, and then you point at the source and say, see, the source is legitimate, so it's good. Right now, those days are over. So, there's goods and bads with it, but that's what's going on, man. It's the Wild West. Yeah. And in the age of influence, and this is what it is, in the information war, there's two forms of combat. The first form of combat is a refutation of lies, right? And the second form of combat is debate. That's the two forms that you have. And it's like right now, both of those are in full effect, and the progressive left is losing ground in a big way because of it. So,
well, the progressive left doesn't have, their mistake was not having anything to anchor into. There was no real bedrock. And I'll give you an example. If your feelings were reality and if your feelings were sacrosanct, then then I had to, that's what you were leaving me to anchor into. So if a man is a man because that I feel like a man, or a woman's a woman because I feel like a woman and I can't really define it, I don't know what to anchor into. So you really can't, you can't mount a credible defense when that is your philosophy. It's just going to crumble because you can't apply it at the level of detail. We're not orientated around not only just a truth, but even a reality at this point. So the rest of us are going to work and trying to make a living and going, all right, whatever your pronouns, and what happens immediately is, oh, you have pronouns on your resume? Cool. I'm not hiring you. And the reason I'm not going to hire you is I'm just don't want to deal with somebody
shit.
who, I just don't. I got to shoot a commercial, or I've got to shoot a movie, or I've got to run a restaurant. I just can't stop for your feelings, because your feelings don't matter. Results matter. And that's what's quickly happened, I think. And I think it's not surprising that at least young men are swaying at least more practical and traditional. All right, let's be honest. I don't know if you're a human being living in this world, but you ever experience, I don't know, a 3 p.m. crash, a mid-morning crash? Your energy just isn't there. Your brain fog, you're having trouble finishing sentences, you're staring in the fridge, you don't know why. Just that lack of energy. Well, guess what? There's something called Vinny out there. So your circulatory system is literally a highway system, and right now, most of us are stuck in traffic. But get this, if you don't feel the difference in physical energy and mental sharpness, they will refund every penny and cover even return postage. Here's the best news. You visit vinia.com/Callen to get Vinia's special buy 2, get 1 month free offer. Now for about $1 a day, you too can experience Vinia's proven results. Plus get 10% off any Vinia purchase when you click the link in the description. So go to vinia.com/Callen. Comes in tea, comes in coffee. I'm doing the coffee. So give it a shot. Do that 90-day trial. I'm in the middle of this. I'm loving it. Let me know what you think. Let's get back to the podcast.
Do you do the old man groan? I have this old man groan. It goes like that. Like when I hear nonsensical bullshit, like, pronouns in a resume, it's something like, oh, like it just,
well, I'm beyond that.
It just like, it's this completely defeated old man groan of like, this shit again. Yeah. Again? Aren't we past this now? Aren't we done with this shit?
Yeah, I don't concern myself with that anymore because I don't even think that's the threat. My issue is that what's way more difficult in life is not drawing comparisons, but it's understanding the meaningful difference between things. And having a consistent, and we've talked about this, battle-tested, stress-tested philosophy that can withstand an attack from any front at any angle. That is much more difficult. So I worry now really about the fact that you have powerful platforms that can showcase different people who get rewarded for amplifying a monologue that says, you're being lied to, I'm right. I went to medical school, I learned nothing, seed oils are killing you, vaccines are dangerous, we didn't go to the moon and here's why, et cetera, et cetera. And my worry is that I kind of say to myself, look, you can say we're being lied to, and you can say, and it's true that you can point to when the scientific community and the experts let us down. It's true that trusting the science unless you're talking about trans stuff, trusting the science unless you're talking about maybe COVID, a bunch of faceless bureaucrats saying that the lab leak is racist. Okay, I get it. Of course, the legacy media did not behave well. Both can be true. We've got to learn as Americans that both can be true, but that at the end of the day, there is something called acumen. There's something called expertise. If you want to get your spine operated on, you want somebody who's been through what's called the traditional medical schools and has been steeped in the scientific method. You don't want a guy who says, hey, I've done all this research on spinal surgery. I'm the guy who knows how to do it differently, unless he's been steeped in all of that as well. So that's kind of what I worry about.
Well, I think you bring up a valid point, but then maybe I can give a little pushback here.
Yeah.
So the idea of like something which has an application, something that's applied, in this case, medicine, where you're going to do open heart surgery or something like this, right?
Mhm.
The reason that you trust those people is because they interned under other people who did open heart surgery for years and years and years, and they have tons and tons and tons of hands-on practice with that, right? With that. But let's say that there was another country somewhere, I don't know where the person was not, they didn't do medicine in a traditional sense like we do. They don't do allopathic medicine. They do some other type of traditional medicine, but they also do open heart surgery. But their success rate was way, way, way higher than the allopathic success rate. Wouldn't you still go to them to get your heart work done?
I would. I'd be
You
responsive
would,
to the
yeah,
evidence.
yeah,
Yeah, the data.
and that makes, that makes total sense, right?
Yeah,
The success. So I'm just saying that credentialism itself is something which is pretty easy to reject because there's so many educated fucking idiots running around, don't know what the hell they're talking about, and they just regurgitate, right? So when you're talking about something which has an application like that, like medicine, remember that one of the leading causes of death in the United States is medical malpractice. One of the leading causes,
right.
misdiagnoses, botched surgeries, the list goes on and on and on. So you're literally putting your hands in experts who kill an awful lot of people. There's not a doctor I've ever met who hasn't killed somebody by accident, and they're pretty open about it. How could they avoid it? It's
Sure.
like it's basically impossible. But I don't want to be that guy. I don't want to be
Right.
the guy
Yeah,
that
yeah,
they
yeah,
kill in
yeah.
order to
Are you
save the
sure?
next
How many
guy
times have you
either,
done
right?
this operation? Yeah,
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 exactly.
yeah.
So the thing is like I think an application you may have a point, but what if we're just talking about knowledge? Like
Mm,
when somebody's just an expert in a field based solely and completely on just the idea of knowledge with no application. Like
mm.
how do you apply history? How do
Right.
you apply, like how do you apply those things other than through a prism of opinion? What makes the expert then? That's the
Well,
question, right?
I would say the answer to that right now would be the consensus. So as I studied Nazi Germany in college. I was a history major. I don't know a lot. I mean, you could quiz me, and a historian would make a mockery of me.
Sure.
But I do have some core tenets. One of the things you get from studying history for 4 years, and if your area of focus would be, say, Nazi Germany, is that there are certain agreed upon facts from which we can tributary. There's a mothership of ideas and let's call them truths based on what actually happened. So we know that Treblinka and Auschwitz were death camps. We know that a lot of Jews were killed. You want to parse 6 million or 5 million, whatever you want to do, but for the most part, we know it was an unacceptable amount, and genocide was something that was coined probably for the first time. We know the Nuremberg trials happened. We know the Nazis kept very careful records. And when you get this historical consensus based on historians from France and from the Soviet Union and from Germany and from the United States, etc., they tend to agree on the core facts, and then from there's some dispute, right? And then when you get some rogue historian who comes along and says, actually, all these guys are wrong, and this is what really happened. Well, that's quite the challenge. Sometimes those people, end up changing everything, right? They have a scientific discovery and they say, like Freud or Darwin says, hey guys, it's really not about Aristotle in the Bible. There's something called natural selection. And we go, what the fuck? And here's the evidence, right? But for the most part, we kind of know to ignore that rogue historian when they're coming out with an outlandish thing based on their own research that seems to buck against this massive body of evidence, right? So maybe that's the answer to how we can know who to listen to when it comes to history after the dust is settled versus who not to. Does that make
Well,
sense?
Napoleon, I get what you're saying. I understand. You're talking about the dangers of revisionism
Mm,
when it comes to certain social categories based around the fact that there could be political agendas behind it or things like this.
yeah.
Or it can definitely be something which can be adopted for a portion of political agenda. I agree, but I'm also reminded of a Napoleon Bonaparte quote that history is an agreed upon set of lies. And so when you talk about consensus, right, this is what Napoleon Bonaparte was saying here. He was saying, well, there's a lot of consensus when it comes to history. They agree on a whole lot of things that just aren't true, right? Let me give you a counterexample, right? I think that your example here when it comes to the Holocaust is perfectly acceptable, but perhaps a counterexample of where historians got it real wrong for a long time and agreed basically 100% with each other, even though they knew they were wrong. And that's the pyramids of Giza, that these were tombs that were designed for mummies, even though no tombs are ever found in any of these places. They were obviously some type of machine that's built, or they have some other purpose that we don't know about. But clearly they weren't tombs. And the outside historians were the ones, the revisionists, saying,
Yeah.
no, this can't be the case. This is absurd. We know where all the mummies are buried. They're in the, they're 100 miles that way. You know what I mean? In the
Yeah.
tombs of kings
It's a
and
great,
this and
that's a
that.
great example.
And they were totally right. They were totally
It's a
right.
great
And it's like,
example.
and it's like, well, so you got to be kind of cautious here when when you categorize this, because now does one of those have more impact than the other ultimately? Yeah, I suppose, especially in modernity, right? But it's still a massive discovery that we're talking about, and whole generations were taught something which was obviously false,
Yeah.
and that they knew was obviously false,
Yeah. Yeah.
And so like and that comes into the play of like, we're being lied to. It's like, well, yeah, we kind of are, and there's a lot of agendas behind lying to us. And so I think I've always been of the mindset that sunlight is the best disinfectant. So it's like, okay, if you have a bunch of Holocaust revisionists, then debate them,
Yeah.
then put the sunlight on it and let's see, who. But the problem is they go, well, you can't do that because then you're propagating like genocidal lunatic ideas, right?
Right.
And so
Or sometimes like someone like
yeah.
David Irving, who's been debunked, to a pretty large degree, so that no historian really wants to get up there and start kind of dealing with a guy who has these sort of fringe ideas that, that are not really being made in good faith, maybe. So that would be one of the issues that I see. Misinformation. Having said that, though, where Daryl Cooper, who I'm actually a fan of because I listen to a lot of his podcasts, and he's not a Nazi apologist by any means, but having said that, there is with this free flow of ideas, there is a lot of pushback, and now we're having this conversation. Dave Smith, and I don't know if you watched the Dave Smith Douglas Murray debate. I know Dave, and I love Dave. I've had many conversations with Dave, and what I thought was interesting about that was Douglas Murray is a guy I admire, and Douglas Murray is a guy I'm going to go to when I want to know what's really going on the ground in Gaza or whatever. However, it didn't disqualify the fact that Dave Smith was saying, hey, dude, I've not been there, but I can see pictures of a leveled northern Gaza, and I know that an unacceptable number of children have been orphaned and killed. You may be right in what you're saying in terms of how bad Hamas is or how they fight. I'm still dealing with children trapped under rubble, and I just don't want to live in a world like that, and I'm outraged by it. And again, both can be true, right? Where you kind of go, I get where he's coming from. He's coming from a good place, right? And in that sense,
I thought Dave was extremely good faith in that debate.
I did too.
I thought that Murray was not nearly as good faith as Smith was. And the thing is like I've debated with Dave. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
and I will always enjoy crushing Dave Smith's ideas, his crazy libertarian ideas, under the boot heel of the Christian nationalist prism. But the thing is like I still like this guy.
Yeah.
I still like this guy.
He's great.
And I still think he's a great debater. I talk to him in DMs all the time,
Yeah.
and I think that he's starting to really come into his own. But where Dave Smith went right and where Murray went wrong is Dave Smith realized after many, many debates are about structured arguments for a worldview, right? And it doesn't matter what you're debating, right? If you're debating about something that has empirical backing doesn't give us odds. It doesn't tell us what we should do. It only gives us descriptors, right? That's it, just descriptors.
That's right.
Dave Smith said, I see your descriptor. What is your argument? And Murray didn't have one. And that was that. He said, "What? They're not making arguments. I want arguments that I can really contend with." And Murray wasn't making them.
Yeah, Douglas Murray's argument was for kinetic force, actually, because that was the only thing bringing the hostages home. And the kinetic force that Israel was applying to Gaza was all on Hamas's doorstep. I can accept that argument to an extent.
But wait, what about when he said, though, that there should be some kind of like prerequisite requirement for you to go to these countries before you speak out about any of the things which are happening in them? That's a descriptive claim, right?
It is a descriptive
Backed by
claim.
what? What is he backing that by? Like, there's so much information that I've learned about all sorts of states I've never gone to,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
All sorts of places I
Yes.
haven't gone to, where I still understand what the laws are and what's going on the ground.
You know what I think that was? I think that was Douglas Murray, who's paid a price being a war correspondent in what he's seen. I'm talking about the emotional trauma of what he's seen.
Yeah.
And I think then he has some guy who's never done that, and he's been like, "Hey, dude, I've been sleeping on the floor, seeing children die," and you can understand where a guy goes, "Listen, you plebe, I've been in the trenches, you know, and you're talking about it," and I think that got the best of him. You know, I think that he was also talking about, if you're going to talk about checkpoints, and if you're going to talk about trade routes, and you're going to talk about it being an open air prison, it would be better to be there to see what daily life is like and talk to the Gazans and see actually where it's not that. It might give you a different perspective. So we don't fall into the trap.
But doesn't that also infer
points.
bias? Like, because you have seen this from a single perspective, especially, and have dealt with this kind of trauma, that you have some bias in this entire thing when you are reporting about it in this type of thing, right? It's like this happens often. If you have American correspondents during an American war, it dug in and entrenched with the troops, they're almost always going to have the pro-U.S. perspective on this.
Yes.
Those are the people that they're friends with. Those are the people who are dying around them.
You'd still want to get your information from the embedded journalist, probably, to know what's really happening, right? Because if they're responsible journalists, they're also seeing the battlefield and in touch with the battlefield on a tactile way that you wouldn't be otherwise, right? So we just naturally as human beings go, it's a different thing to be there. You're going to get a different perspective. It's a little bit like
I agree. Listen, I agree with that. I'm just saying that everything in the military and from the government to military level, including for war correspondents, is designed specifically to push out a message, a narrative, and the narrative is always going to be friendly to the side you're embedded with. That's always going to be the case where the political pressure is for not just war correspondents, but for anybody who's on the ground. It's going to be a positive message towards that side. Nobody wants to embed journalists with their troops so that they go back and report badly on their nation, right?
That's true.
So they're always going to put them in the situations they possibly can for the best possible publicity and press towards their side. So there could be an implication there of bias as well. It's not nearly so one-dimensional, you know.
It's not one-dimensional. I would say there are two liabilities. I think podcasts on the whole, especially like Joe Rogan's podcast and stuff, has been a good thing for all of us because we have been exposed to some of the best that's been thought and said. We've been exposed to just great ideas, people who write books. Nobody has time to write a book, but you get a sense of what the book is about in 3 hours, et cetera, et cetera. I think where the liability is two things. One, as podcasters, we don't have the attention span to hold on to something to its completion in terms of like, don't rely on podcasts only as your source of information. But the second thing is this. If it's a guy like Joe Rogan, it's a guy like myself, it's a guy like, whoever it might be, if you have somebody on there who says something like, and I'm using this as an example because I don't think it's fair to Daryl Cooper, but if he said, actually, the Nazis were provoked into this war. The Russians were given no choice but to invade Ukraine, et cetera, et cetera. You need somebody who is very familiar with that argument and where it came from to stop it in its tracks, or at least to push back before we get any further. That is the only liability I see in terms of like, sometimes if you don't know that David Irving is that historian, if you don't know enough about math and Terrence Howard's saying 1 × 1 is 2, you're not going to understand why that's a destructive idea and why it's a ridiculous idea. If you don't know that the Sinai Bible, the Synoptic Gospels, are a forgery, then you're going to go, hey, there's a lot of evidence that Christ wasn't crucified.
Right.
But then you get a guy like, right, you get a guy like Wes Halfa goes, excuse me, you dude who says he's traveled everywhere,
Yeah.
you're a fraud, and you're talking about a known fraud. You didn't even know that. Once I heard that, I went, oh, this guy's a complete idiot. And that's good to have, right? That's expertise. People who are real mathematicians should be debating against a guy like Terrence Howard. All due respect, great.
Well, let
actor.
me ask you this, because you bring up this good point with Wes Hoff, who did this incredible debate where, by the way, very composed, very kind. The
Very
entire
kind.
debate
Very kind.
did not. He
Very
never.
Christian. Very
this
Christian.
guy never blinked. He never even blinked.
No.
He was a blank slate. And all he simply did was ask a few very, very nonchalant style
Socratic
questions,
yeah.
and led this guy right into the abyss, right? Where all of his
He had to
skin
leave.
was
The guy
melted
left.
off, his bones were disintegrated. There was nothing left. It was
What's that guy's name?
I don't remember, but it was an accidental in many ways masterclass on how you can really deliver a coup de grace in a debate if you're armed with knowledge the other person does, which is what you're alluding to. Like, he was the right guy at the right place at the right time to contest this. But here's the thing. Doesn't this in some ways give you a good counter narrative for this, which is if these people proliferate the idea and build it up, all it takes is one expert to come in and just completely
Tear the whole house
destroy
down.
it down to its roots. And isn't that what sticks with people?
100%.
You know, like, so in some ways, isn't it its own checks and balance? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, sure, you run the risk that you could get some misinformation or people out there who are delivering on a bad message. I'm sure there's all sorts of people who disagree with you on the provocation of Germans, whether or not we were responsible for Pearl Harbor ourselves due to the various policies the U.S. was implementing against Imperial Japan. There's a million different thoughts that are going around here, right?
Yes.
But all it really takes is one guy, if the wrong narrative gets proliferated, to just destroy it so deeply into its roots that there is no recovery.
And, to piggyback on that, I thought that Dave Smith made the expert look a little callous because, in fact, as much as I admired Douglas Murray, I didn't hear any solution other than more kinetic force, more destruction, more death, and that was a tough pill to swallow. Now, maybe he's being realpolitik about this, and maybe that's the reality on the ground, but I hate living in a world like that. At least Dave Smith said, does it not bother you? Is it not worth talking about that children are trapped under rubble and screaming and nobody's coming? That's a real question. As human beings, we should be asking that question. Maybe it's a Christian question.
Not only do I agree, but, I have one of the things that I have a lot of respect for Dave on. He reminds me a lot of me in this way, right? The not one step back. So Dave, he goes into the lion's den, outgunned all the time, and he frankly doesn't give a shit. In fact, more and more, he's seeming to be right at home in that environment, right?
Because I think he's coming in there with at least how he believes there's a right and a wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And
he's trying to give an association here and just say, look, if nobody else is going to speak on this and from this view, I will. Right. And I'm going to do the best job I can. Now, maybe I'm just a comic somewhere, right? Now, I argued, I would say fairly successfully on X on behalf of comics after that debate and said, look, if you want to really look at social change, right, I would argue that comedians deliver social change better than any think tank could ever dream of and any social progressive NGO could ever think of. As much as they love social engineering, the truth is that a well-placed joke can bring society to its knees for a week. And I've seen it. I've seen it 100 times
100%.
Where the entire discourse of the nation changes over one guy's joke.
Yeah.
Right. And why? Because it's delivering so much truth. Yeah. Otherwise, it wouldn't make you laugh, right? It couldn't make you laugh if it wasn't true.
So true.
And so there, the half of the nation's dying of laughter, and the other half is cleaning their rifles, thinking how to get them to shut their mouths, right?
Yeah.
And this is, I would argue, one of the key points for social change is through satire. And men respond really well to satire, and it's an easy way to break down barriers between men. self-deprecating jokes assist with that as well, but
Yeah.
also kind of brutal cutting jokes. If you want to look at Jon Stewart of The Daily Show, he was a master of changing political discourse through cutting rhetoric of the right wing. You know what I mean?
Well,
Now
that's
this new guy Oliver, he sucks at it, right? But
yeah.
Stewart was good.
He was
He was
very
good
good.
at
Yeah,
it.
yeah. John Oliver, he annoys me, but that's I love doing that with my new special. What dawned on me about the trans movement was one of the things that was fun to hold on to was that if you wanted to be a minority, if for minorities like Black, brown, and indigenous people to be minorities, they had to go through hundreds of years of colonization and slavery. But you now could be white as the driven snow. You could be a white biological male and be a more threatened and larger minority than a black man, asked Dave Chappelle. And you didn't have to go through slavery or anything else. A white person could be a bigger minority than a brown person, an indigenous person, or a black person because they felt like one. That's the root of it. You literally could just feel like a man or a woman, regardless of what your biology was. And now we had to treat you not only as the most vulnerable you might, because you could take your own life.
You just turn yourself into a minority.
That's it. That's what you can do.
You just magic wand yourself. Well, I mean, think about this.
And you go, why? You have a beard and a dick. No, but I feel like it. Oh, well, everybody, now we've got to, don't dead name him. Apparently his name is Andrina, not Andrew anymore. Holy shit.
Well, it's really funny. You make a good point here, right? But sometimes it's in what's not said. So when I was growing up, I always heard it said this way by the left: women and minorities, whenever they were making a political reference to, somebody's going to get fucked over here, it was always women. This is going to disproportionately affect who? Women and minorities. Well, who the fuck's left? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, who's left?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
If it's women and who's left? There's only one group that's left.
That's right.
So,
that's exactly right.
Sometimes it's like what's not said. Sometimes it's like what's not
just
said.
Kill all the white men.
Yeah, exactly. What's not said is what you're actually saying. You know what I mean? It's like there's only one group left here, guys. So you might as well just say the quiet part out.
Right.
Loud.
Right. Just talk about passive aggressive, man.
Yeah, so bad.
So do you worry about misinformation, and do you worry that misinformation keeps the average American from the truth? Or is there no way to avoid that?
I don't worry as much about it without institutional support. And so that's another key part, right? Is like the Fauci misinformation that was going around for the jabby stabbies and during C-19 and all of this madness, where tech censorship was at an all-time high. I would argue at the most all-time high I've ever seen it in my life. People were getting banned for saying the word vaccine. That's it. Then banned. Your whole channel's gone.
Yep.
That had real institutional authority behind the misinformation, to the point of legislation. They were talking, and the left wants you to conveniently forget this, but they were talking about COVID passports, and not for you to travel to other countries, but for you to go to fucking work. Okay, for you to go to work, they wanted you to have your papers, and you were going to get checkpoint stops, on the way to your job and this type of thing. And it's like, now I could see some sense in this if you had a pandemic where it's like this a 50% mortality rate.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Not 0.25%.
Yeah, if you patriotically need to stay at home because otherwise you could kill your whole family here in a big way. That was not the case. Okay, that was just simply not.
We were told it was for a while.
Well, it all fell apart the second they were like, well, yeah, Black Lives Matter can burn everything down and be in close proximity because social justice is more important than grandma. And it's like, get the fuck out of here.
That's right.
Get the fuck out.
Right.
That collapsed the entire narrative for everybody. Yeah. That was it. It was over. The left lost right then and there. The second the newspaper articles came out and said social distancing for thee, but not for me, because this whole social justice thing, that takes priority over the fact that grandma's dying and you can't go see her, you disgusting, non-patriotic piece of human garbage.
Yeah.
So, but ultimately, to kind of back it up, misinformation right now from podcasters has no institutional power except on the left. What we found and discovered, and recently we've also discovered that there is a little bit of corporate sponsorship from right-wing NGOs on right-wing commentators. Remember the whole
Yes.
soft
Yeah.
drinks,
Yep.
welfare soft drinks debacle, right?
Mhm.
Where a bunch of right-wing influencers came out and said, well, I'll be damned if I'm not going to allow people to use their food stamps on Coca-Cola products. And it turns out they were all getting the same marching orders, right?
Yeah.
That's no bueno. But real government, top-down institutional authority, left-wing podcasts have been getting paid from all sorts of left-wing think tanks. You get government kickbacks, and that's
And
been
to
going
push
on
the
for,
Biden agenda and everything else.
yep,
That's right. I know
that's been
people
going
who are.
on for a long
I
time.
didn't
And
know
tech
that until very
companies,
recently, by the way.
yep, and tech
Yeah.
companies artificially also prop up many of the left-wing messengers. Now, we knew about this years ago. The Crucible, we'd be in other creators' discords watching them go over their like little think tank discourse. You know what I mean? Here's how you refute this, and here's how you refute that, and here's what we're going to do with it. And I'm like, where are you getting this shit? Where's this
Well,
stuff coming
well,
from?
and legacy media had the same script.
Yeah.
They'd all be saying the exact same thing. So it was coming down the wire from, I don't know, the AP or whoever it was. That was amazing. They'd literally be reading this. They'd be saying the same thing in unison. So it's hard.
And it would be disseminated just like that. And it's like from the bottom up. We found out that Brianna Wu with with a progressive think tank went to Twitch politics and bought up every single left-wing Twitch political streamer they could possibly find, including ones that had 50 live viewers, and put them on the payroll. And we're paying them $1,000, $2,000, $5,000 a month in order to shill on behalf of this organization called Progressive Victory, right? So an agent provocateur, by the way, completely against Twitch's TOS. So what did they do? They said, they're just consultants, right? They don't work for us. They're consultants. So it complied with the TOS. Whole story breaks on this, right? And they're just kind of shrug it off. It's like, well, no big deal. And it's like, look, it's a big deal. So there is, I think, misinformation with institutional authority that could be very dangerous. But misinformation from a guy in his basement, right?
Yeah.
Well, here,
But
let me give you an example of the biggest misinformation podcast or radio show I've ever heard. It was called Coast to Coast AM by Art Bell. Okay. Whole thing was misinformation. And Art Bell was smart. He knew it. Wonderful entertainment, right? Everybody was enjoying themselves listening to that show. You would be hearing about the gray aliens as you were driving down I-5 at 1 o'clock in the morning with Art Bell's silky smooth voice telling you how it is that the gray nymph are going to come back in time in order to assassinate your grandparents, right? Wonderful misinformation, totally entertaining, right?
Yeah.
But you have to have context. You have to have context, right? And this is the thing. It's like right now we don't have context, but I think that'll come in time.
Yeah. I think that you make a great point. I never thought of that. That's very true. The amount of misinformation that was coming out of the left, from Russian collusion to, for that matter, trans ideology to COVID misinformation, all of that. And they won't recover from that. The legacy media will not recover. They just won't. And they shouldn't, frankly. They shouldn't. So
they did the too big to fail too thing.
But by the way,
they really tried.
It's also funny that all of that effort to buy up all those Twitch streamers and things like that didn't work. It just didn't work, did it? Oprah, Beyonce, none of them. They launched it. They threw everything.
I had the benefit, my friend. Work. Oh, it was the most wonderful thing. I wish you could have been having a drink with me right here in my basement studio. You would have had the time of your life. As I tuned in election night, it called the election early. The second I saw the blue wall topple, I was like, this is over. And we got to put on a live stream of a very famous streamer named Destiny, who had all of his entire coalition of Progressive Victory bought and paid for shill fucking scumbags, all in the same room, right? And all of them in a shocked state of absolute disbelief, crying and hugging. And I just couldn't take it, to the laughter of Andrew Wilson, who I could not contain it. It must have been an hour straight of just pure laugh in the chat.
That nicotine laugh.
And the chat was laughing, and everyone was laughing, and we just have not stopped laughing. But the thing is you're right. It didn't work. It didn't work ultimately, right?
Right.
But that was with some institutional power behind the messaging, and it still didn't work. So
Mm.
do like regular podcasters who have folders full of fucking, we're gonna go over the grassy knoll today, boys, and here's all my evidence. Like, is that really going to be earth shattering or earth changing for
Right.
misinformation? I don't think so.
I don't think so either.
I think we're all right.
And by the way, for the record, I think Destiny is, at least Destiny takes on people. At least he debates. At least he's in the mix. You know,
we got one live in 2 weeks.
Oh,
we
you
got
do?
one live
You
at
and
a
Destiny do?
university. Yeah.
Oh, I can't wait.
Yeah, I mean, I've been debating with the Coomer Gremlin for fucking years. Like it's always going to be the case. There's like I don't know who's Batman and who's Joker in the dynamic, but we've been fighting for years. It's always been above board, you know what I mean? We take a couple of pop shots at each other, but it's always been pretty much above board.
Yeah, I think
he's the only worthwhile fucker on the left to debate anymore. Right?
Yeah.
He's the only one who's even worth debating.
I wish I'd been there when Wes Watson was threatening you, because I would have had to stepped up in your place, and I would have been like, that's my friend, he's smarter than you, but if you want to smack him, you can try to smack me and we can see what happens. It's going to be a bad day for you.
Well, he's back in prison.
He's back in prison. I know.
Yeah,
I didn't like that. That really made me mad, because you're my buddy, and I was like, all right, that's not Andrew Wilson's thing. He did.
You know what though? He did me the biggest service ever.
Yeah.
In a way, right? Because there was never a need. There was never a need for me to engage with any of the physical stupidity, right? All I needed to do was showcase.
It was so crazy inappropriate. It was so ridiculous.
Showcase the distinction. Here's the distinction in messaging, right?
Yeah.
What I'm not trying to give you materialism. I'm not trying to give you all this, and none of that shit's going to make you happy. Look, I run in circles now at this point in my life. Tons and tons and tons of rich people. Fucking miserable, okay?
Yeah, by the way, yeah.
And yet all my working class buddies, right, who are finally get their vacation 6 months in, you know what I mean, are kicking back, and you go to their house, they're floating in a pool with a beer. Like, get the fuck in here. Get in here. You know what I mean?
True,
it's like, look,
it's
so not true. Just the materialist message has been a failure. It's always been a failure. It's always going to come. It's always going to go. Before Wes Watson, there was prosperity gospel preachers telling you the same shit. God's going to heal you with the millions. God's going to make sure that you'll slice the pepperoni pizza after this is blessed with the Lord's wealth, right? They would go absolutely ballistic with this stuff, trying to fill this void with materialism, which can't be filled by anything other than two things: family and purpose. The telos, the nous and the telos coming together, and the family and purpose, and that's teleology. It's Christian ethics. Is the ability to understand teleology, the telos, the purpose of man itself. That is the driving force of all virtue and all claims of goodness in the world. And that was the opposition message which was given. You can't compete with that. There's no competition with that. You get destroyed in seconds because everybody loves their mama, right? Everybody, even badmen, as they say, love their mama. And even Wes Watson probably loves his, right?
Yeah.
And the second mama's under threat, that purpose, right, kicks in. And it's like all that materialism doesn't mean shit anymore, does it? You'll give all, Dave Ramsey used to say, it's really funny. He used to say, a man will sacrifice his health for wealth and then spend all of his wealth to buy back his health.
That's so great. You get caught, you become a snake eating its own tail. It's very true. That's very true. Are you what are you worried about are you concerned with the chaos that is the first I don't know how many days, 3 months of the Trump administration?
I mean, here's the thing. We knew it was going to be chaos, right? Yeah. And some of the things that Trump said he wasn't going to do, he immediately did, but they were all things that we wanted him to do. Like, for instance, political revenge. Okay, in my heart of hearts, in my sneaking evil heart of hearts, I wanted Trump to get as much political revenge as possible.
Well, they were trying to literally put him in jail for the rest of his life. So that's
another form of,
that's murder. That's murder.
Yeah. Because of the rhetoric of the left, assassins came out to blow his head off at a rally and ended up killing an innocent person. They ended up killing an innocent person.
A fire chief. A hero.
Horrible what they did. And all it took was a head turn. The guy barely got away. You know what I mean? And so, he woke up the next morning and he went, fuck this. Fuck this. Yeah. They're all going down. We're getting them all. Come hell or high water, we're getting them all. And people love that shit. We
Yeah,
wanted to see it. Do more of that. You
that's
know what I
right.
mean? Now, on the tariff stuff, he gets a lot of shit for the tariffs. They're like, well, why would you put tariffs on Canada? Why would you put tariffs on Mexico? It's like, well, if they have free trade agreements with China and we put 100% tariff on China, they just access the back door, right?
Mm.
They can go through Canada. Canada sells their goods to us. Ipso facto, they have now bypassed the tariff. Like,
Mm.
that's obvious stuff, right? We have these massive deficits with these other nations, these trade deficits, primarily, and China's a huge one, right? And then on the export import front, it's like, yeah, we have an opportunity right now to cripple their emergent economy, a future known enemy of the United States. Of course, we're going to do that. Of
Right.
course we are.
Yeah.
And if you need to leverage the entire world stage with economic, doom and gloom, if they don't come to the table to assist you with that, that's exactly what you're supposed to do. That's exactly what we need you to do, and that's exactly what he's doing. So he gets a lot of shit, right? Because people are like, "Well, I don't want to pay more for my, $15, strap pack or whatever that I go hiking in that was made in fucking China by, third world sweatshop kids. Now it's going to go up to $17, right?" And it's like, well, the thing is, you don't even know what the cost benefit analysis ultimately these policies will be. Could be that Chinese factories have to necessarily lower their price. You might get those goods for cheaper in order for them to compete against the tariff. You don't know.
Either way, a deal will be made, right? I mean, either
Of
way,
course.
it sounds like something. There's a symbiotic relationship here. Something can be worked out, and that's what it feels like. There's been a lot of intellectual property theft from the United States by China, with no consequences. There's a lot of that stuff. So I'm hoping.
Well, and they said, what did they say on Joe Rogan's podcast? I don't remember who the guest was. He made a great point. I looked into it. He was right. He said, look, if you go to a world court, okay, and the Chinese do, and they want to sue a U.S. company, that's a U.S. company showing up for the suit. Okay,
Yeah.
they're going to show up. They're going to have to defend themselves. It's going to go through the court system. They have standing. It's going to happen. You can't sue a Chinese company from America.
No.
They don't give a shit and they don't enforce it.
I've got
How in
friends
the world?
who went through that. Yeah.
Yeah, how's that playing by the rules, man?
Right.
How is that coming to the table for, for us to be able to even get back intellectual property from our inventors? Those are our countrymen, our blood, who invent these wonderful world-changing products. And some little fuck over in China just rips it off, right? And just dismisses the entire reciprocity of being able to go after them for redress for stealing this from you. And oftentimes, here's why that's so dangerous too. It's not just the idea, oh, well, they stole the property and they're making it for cheaper. It's that you can actually take a product that could be world changing, make it so poorly that you destroy its fucking reputation forever. Forever.
Right. Well, but by the other thing is the number of Chinese nationals in AI labs who are de facto spies for the CCP because they don't have a choice. When the CCP comes to you and says, hey, you're doing this for us, you're not saying no. You can't say no. So, and I've had a couple of people who were whistleblowers in the whole AI thing and worked at OpenAI for a while. And it's so competitive among different American companies that they're hiring whoever's the best. And a lot of them are Chinese nationals. But it's not surprising that DeepSeek and these things have disrupted our whole AI industry because, and now you can say open source is good and whatever. I don't get into that. I do think, though, that was probably a result of the fact that they had access to our labs and had access to our technology and took it. So,
Well, and let me make another really rudimentary argument that I also found to be very convincing, even though it's so rudimentary. You and I would agree that power and the dollar are intertwined, that generally, if you're a wealthy person, you tend to have a lot more power than a person who's not wealthy.
Yes.
Especially if you're in an industry that controls some type of product that people want, that's going to necessarily accumulate power. Well, if I have to pick between American moguls who are, in some way, they have to answer to the American people and have to answer to our court system, I definitely want them to have the power over any Chinese national
Yes.
who like if I have to pick between American Bill Gates or fucking Chin Wu Zi, I'm picking Bill Gates,
Yes.
right? Because at least
please don't mock Chinese names by saying Chin Wu Zi. There's nobody named Chin Wu Zi out there.
Okay,
Andrew, for God's sake. For God's sake, Andrew.
Yeah, but what am I thinking? What am I thinking?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure that they would be like,
no, you're 100%. That's a great point, though. That's a great point. That's it. That's
I mean, at
true.
least if I have to choose, in other words, the great evils here for like who's got to have to control all of this, versus who isn't. It's like if power necessarily is going to create influence and is going to create power over certain infrastructures and certain technologies and this and that, I still want it local. Okay? Yeah. I still want it to be my king. Right.
Let's go back to your Christian nationalism, because your nationalism would mean America first, right? Somewhat protectionist, or you still believe in the world market and the open market?
Protectionist as far as any necessity towards putting America first. So if protectionism is necessary for us to get the best deal for our people, if protectionism is necessary for us to control our own borders, if protectionism is a necessary precondition for doing these things, then protectionism. If getting into global markets for some reason, perhaps to keep the American dollar very strong or something like that, is necessary for the security of the American people, then I'm fine with opening up a bit for global markets and trade and things like that as well.
Sure. So whatever works, whatever's best for the prosperity of the American people.
Yes, the prosperity of the American people always needs to be the center point. So all other, the way that I view it, through the prism of what America first is supposed to be, that all other social ideologies and political ideologies always start with this question: is this good for us before it's good for anybody else? Right? It's not good enough that it's equal. It's not even good enough that we have a deal where it's good for you and good for us. We need to always come out on top.
See, I go further than that.
People first.
I go further than that, Andrew. I say to myself, I think the founding fathers solved a political problem, and I think of the people, for the people, and by the people is and the great checks and balances, the bicameral legislature, the fact that we have an executive, that we have a judicial branch, that we have the legislative branch. These are, and by the way, the fourth estate, who speaks truth to power. These are all great checks and balances. These all are there so that power does not sit or reside or can't be factioned into one particular group. So in a lot of ways, what I love about the American experiment is that it allows human beings, regardless of who you are and where you are, it allows Americans, and they can be of Chinese descent, they can be of Ashkenazi descent, they can be of Swedish descent. It allows Americans, people, to realize their potential. There's no other system that allows someone to be what they can be, what they can imagine themselves to be. And most of the world has to deal, they have to forego who they could be for who they have to be. And that's directly related probably to a lot of factors, but mainly that they got it wrong back when, and they're holding on to something like a monarchy, an oligarchy, or whatever it is. So in my opinion, if you look at the Constitution, it is, and even the separation of church and state, regardless of how religious you are, it is the great document. It is the greatest idea in political philosophy, far and away. And it is because it dovetails so well with the best human nature has to offer.
But there's a precondition for it to work, which was stated by the founders. The precondition is that it has to be for a moral population, or it can't work.
Yep.
We no longer have a moral population, and you see all Western nations which have piggybacked off of constitutional ideas, including Mexico, who drafts a constitution directly off of ours. Many European nations also borrowed from it. Even 150 years ago, they were still borrowing from it. The problem is you don't have a moral population. If you have no moral population, what's going to happen necessarily is that we're going to shift in faction into groups, and that's exactly what we've done.
Do you not think we have a moral population? I think we are. I think Americans are filling churches back up and everything else. I think that we are. They're leaving
the Protestant churches in droves. They are moving a little bit more towards traditional churches, but look.
Right.
just 60, 70 years ago, it was 90% plus who identified as Christian and at least went to church occasionally. But whether or not they were going to church, they were still at least adopting Christian ethics as being the standard of universal for which all people needed to abide their lives, at least to some degree. That's gone.
Define those Christian ethics for us.
Well, Christian ethics is going to be broadly based around the idea of the covenant laws, including the Ten Commandments, the laws that Jesus Christ put down, and the general teachings of Jesus Christ into a single ethical system. The ethical system itself is going to be in a relationship to how human beings both treat each other and how they do a process of law when it comes to an ethical purview.
So
It
everybody's
answers
have
all
this. Everybody's have the same moral worth, due
Well,
process, incidents of proven guilty.
inherently, yes. Things like slavery would be, and this is why Christians were so adamant against slavery, right? And why
Right.
they were the first to the table
They were.
for abolition, especially in Europe.
People
And
forget that.
here in the
Yeah.
United States, even the deists, many of them were opposed to the institution of slavery. They hated it. They thought that it was a kind of black eye. But that's the way the world worked. And a lot of these guys were, you're at the mercy in some ways to how the traditions of the world have operated. And up until that point, up until abolition, the whole world operated on slavery for thousands of years. And there wasn't,
Right.
there, I mean, that was just the MO of everything. But what Christian ethics provides is it provides universal basic ethics, universalized in a way that you can justify. So you can base the reasonings behind the things that you ought to do along the lines of what the divine commands from Almighty God Himself were. And so now you have both justification and an accounting, right? And when this is applied, we get to see something else that's really great, the effects. And the effects of a Christian and moral populace are fantastic. The effects of a secular populace are communism, they're socialism, they're secular humanism. There are all of these other isms which lead towards great decadence in society and towards
But
the
also
destruction of
creativity.
families.
Also creativity. Yeah.
Yeah.
In other words,
well, yeah, I would argue that creativity, when you think of things like beauty and creativity and things like this, the inspirations for those things almost always come from love of family, and from
or the divine
ideas
of some kind, right? The
Yeah,
idea
sure.
that I'm,
but that's part of the family structure too. Like with absent family, right? Absent the idea of brothers, sisters, moms, dads, kids, cousins, things like that. Absent that, purpose gets driven out. Like
I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think the absence of fathers has been one of the most destructive things maybe the most destructive thing in this society. But how do you I guess factor our individual rights and individual liberty? Is that great against your Christian national philosophy?
Well, I'll untangle it for you. I don't believe that rights exist. They're not an objective material thing. They're a conceptualization. They're not, they exist nowhere except inside the mind. So absent the mind, rights are not there anymore. But what is left is force. Even absent all minds, the force of nature, the forces that be are still very much in effect. And this is a material reality. When you reduce rights down, you really are reducing them down to just force. The idea is just force, and here's why it has to be that way. And our founders must have known it because they said a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, right? So they're putting in a safeguard here saying that ultimately all of your rights come down to force, because if you can't enforce what you consider an entitlement to be, you don't have an entitlement.
That's right.
It's only as strong as the barrel of the gun.
This was a
which
nation
keeps it
state. This is the
intact.
point of a nation state. Very important to have a nation state that you can defend. You've got to have borders you can defend and that you can identify and collectively agree upon. Because
and a people who belong in those borders.
That's right. Otherwise, you will turn into Chechnya or the Kurds or the Tibetans or whatever it might be. Yeah.
Or now modern day UK, where it's being completely invaded in a way which is which now
right.
the whole multicultural project, all you have to do is point to the UK, and the left shits its pants, rightfully so. And boy, they tried to keep all of the essays under wrap. They tried to keep what was going on there under
Same
wrap
thing with
for
Ireland.
years.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, for years. And now there's just no more keeping it under wrap because people there are so pissed off that they're speaking out whether you like it or not, whether the government likes it or not, they don't
you
care.
wake the Brits up. If you wake the Brits up, they come alive when it comes to soccer / football and war.
Yeah.
And you want to wake those boys up in the north, in Birmingham and Liverpool and all those areas. Good luck, man. It's going to be ugly because.
I mean,
and the Irish too. The Irish fought for their independence for 1,000 years.
Hooligans have been getting into drunken fist fights in the streets since they were 13. They don't
Brutal.
give a shit. They love it. They love it. It's their favorite thing in the world.
No strangers to violence and good at it. And good at
none.
it. So,
and by the way, and they even incorporate their own rules. So like, all right, lads, you can't stab them. Right? You can't kick them too much while they're down. Right. It's just a good old-fashioned bloodying of the nose, and then you let them on their way. They learned their lesson. You send them home to mama, right?
That's right.
The hooligans have even enforced their own
fisticuffs
of how to properly hooligan, right? So it's like there's a proper way to be a hooligan and an improper way to be a hooligan.
It's rather unsightly.
Yeah, it's rather unsightly. How dare you? But ultimately, the point is like the multicultural experiment has failed, and it shows you just what the limits of rights are. There aren't any other than what it is.
The pushback on that though would be the strength of the United States has been we're a nation of immigrants, but people forget that we are a nation of immigrants that is assimilated around a singular way of life, right? The Constitution, freedom of speech, and the right to bear arms, and all these things, right? I mean.
It wasn't, I guess you could make the argument it was a nation of immigrants, but it was mostly just English and French, right? It was mostly
but
English.
The Italians, the Jews.
That was later, though. Italians, Irish, all that came later. They
still contributed to a great deal of innovation, and the ethnic Chinese. This has worked for the most part because people went, this is where I can become a business owner. I can make money. I can use my own ingenuity, my own effort, my own risk-taking, and become fabulously wealthy or anything I want to be. And so as a result,
the universal ethics, right? So you take Italians, just Catholic, right? You take Irish, Catholic, right? You take the universalization. And by the way, there were shared communities of, Irish and Italians and various immigrant groups like this who did rally behind religion. Now but you could also take, good examples of like the Irish and the Dutch who absolutely hated each other because the Irish Catholics and the Dutch Protestant reformers. They just loathed each other, right? But they weren't arguing over the universals of right and wrong. They were arguing mostly over who's in charge of the church. Do we have, these are baseline theological disputes, and they do carry down into like people group hatred of the Dutch and Irish still having this rivalry even to this day in Michigan. But the universal ethics were still there. Where are they coming from now? India? What are the universal ethics from India exactly that are going to incorporate in to the ideas of a Christian nation? What are they going to be?
Well,
these are people
But I don't worry about that. I don't think that somebody from India who comes in and puts education at a premium and starts a startup or a business and takes over Google or whatever, I don't think that's the threat here. I think that's our strength because, again, we've got to preserve innovation. Innovation really that's probably why the separation of church and state makes sense and was put in there, because you want people, your God and yourself are a private matter, to quote George Washington loosely. More importantly is that the potential to be who you want to be, economically especially, seems to be the strength of our country to a large degree. Yay or nay?
Nay. I would say,
nay.
Well, here's my argument. I lost picture from you, by the way.
For God's sake.
I lost picture.
It's outrageous. All right.
Yeah, outrageous, unbelievable.
Yeah.
I have to, I do have to kind of push back and disagree on this. So at our founding, every single state basically had a state religion. The 10th Amendment is put in to say that any of the authorities that are not given to the federal government go to the states prospectively. The federal government is not allowed to make a law governing a national religion. That was always supposed to be up to the states, and the states did that. They created a haven through religiosity, in fact, and they continue to have state religions past the signing of the Constitution of the United States. And they were well within their rights to do that, and they still are within their rights to do that. So, yeah, Congress can't make a law which governs, one religion over another. It can't give a preference to one over the other. That's true via the First Amendment. But states definitely can. They're 100% within their rights to. That's what the 10th Amendment was there to do.
Wouldn't that grate against the Constitution and what Congress says, though? You
No,
couldn't really.
I mean, no, it specifically wouldn't, right? That's what the 10th Amendment is there for. If the federal government doesn't have the authority, it goes to the
Mississippi
states.
says we're a Christian state, and you've got to adhere to Christian rules.
Well, they do it now. Like people forget about this, but they do it now. Like, isn't Utah run by Mormons, really?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Isn't it really the case that the Dutch in Michigan, who are Dutch Calvinist reformers, hold a lot of the keys to the power? Yeah, it sure is. It's like ultimately you're kind of playing a song and a dance in a way and turning away from the obvious, right? Which is they're in power anyway, and they're going to continue to be in power. The only distinction is they're not public about it, and they should be.
So what would your Christian nationalist nation look like? What would be different?
What would be different would be the idea that Christians can rule with the authority of Christian ethics, and that would be totally acceptable, and governing laws should be formed around those ideas.
So abortion would be illegal, gay marriage would be illegal.
Yes.
What else?
Transgenderism would likely take a rear seat going into the idea of a social contagion, a public health crisis. The Christians would probably say, look.
But say I'm a man and I want to wear a dress, get up on stage and be a rock and roller. I want to wear makeup like David Bowie. What do we do with that? You don't want to kill the color.
I think that localized. So this is the beautiful thing about the 10th Amendment, right? If you want to have localized degeneracy, you can. But other regions, right, inside the United States, they may not want that. They may not want you to dress in fucking girl gear and go up on stage. And,
so it'd be like we'd still have Mississippi Bible Belt in San Francisco.
Yeah, well, I mean, what the hell was wrong with that? Like, honestly, what was actually wrong with that? Did it need to get polluted with degeneracy? Like, did we just have to do that? We're like, those people over there with their fucking morals.
It's more about freedom. It's more about freedom of expression, right? This is what it comes down to. I want to express myself the way I want to express myself. If I want to dye my hair purple and get breast implants, then as a man, then that's what I'm going to do.
Well, what are your social obligations? Do you have any of those, though? Do you have any social duties or social obligations where it's not just me, where maybe for the purpose of social cohesion and for society at whole, you can express yourselves in ways that don't fuck with the social cohesion of everybody else? Like, what about that idea? We're always so focused on me.
Well, that was parsed out with rights, and as long as your rights don't trample on my rights, but then we have to protect against the tyranny of the majority, right?
Yeah, but those are impossible. Those are impossible to delineate when that's even happening. You know what I mean? Like, here's a good example. You buy a plot of land and it has a little river running through it, and you dam it up. You know what I mean? Are you fucking with everybody else's rights, or aren't you?
Right.
There's the.
But that'd be parsed out. That'd be parsed out in the courts. When you, right?
Yeah. Well, you can. Sure, you can go parse it out in court, but you're still just deferring judgment of interpretation to when that happens to some other body and authority, and it's like ultimately. It's almost an impossibility to make the delineation of, well, my rights begin where yours end, or yours end where mine begin. It's like, but we also have duties and obligations. We talk a lot about entitlements, which are rights. Rights are going to be an entitlement absent a duty. Well, what duties do you have absent entitlements? That's my question to you. What duties do you have absent
And I think what I hear you saying, as I think about it, is that regardless of whether you want to live under Christian ethics, you're going to live under some ethics. And you're going to live under, and those ethics will be enforced, and you will engage in a social contract. So you're going to be forced to do something. You may as well choose Christian ethics because that seems to have worked historically.
Actually, that's a beautiful summary. It's a beautiful summary to say the idea is that there's going to be somebody's going to take the sword of power, whether you like it or not.
100%.
It might as well be you, especially when you're dealing with the other side, who are a bunch of murderous leftist lunatics,
Yes.
who focus 100% on the degradation, social destruction of the core of the family unit. And it's like,
They're also
my
so
question,
reductive. They're also so reductive. It's
Oh, yeah.
oppressed, oppressor. It's power, powerless. They're just binary as it gets. For a bunch of non-binaries, they're incredibly binary.
Aren't they though?
They really fucking
and
are.
nuance.
They're-
Nuance
oh,
is
God.
always so hard.
Oh,
for
and
the
and you're and
progressive
how
mind.
you what you meant doesn't matter. It's what you said. They made it fucking impossible
to have
and,
discourse. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, through deconstructionism. But you know what? You can use that weapon back against them. And I do it often, deconstructing their ideas the same way they've attempted to do to us. And they're way more absurd than anything you could ever say about Sky Daddy, right? They worship Earth Daddy. Like that's some big, some big revelation.
They certainly do. Yeah.
But the question just becomes this. It just becomes, and this is a question I would challenge you to do this. I would challenge you to get with your closest friends and just ask them this question. I know what all your rights are. I know what all of your entitlements are. I know all the things that you deserve. And I feel like I deserve all those things too. But what are your social duties absent in the entitlement? What are they? And I bet you most of them will tell you they don't have any. And if you want to know why society is really as fucked up as it is, why everything is completely destroyed, it's because inside of your home, you know that that's not true. You have tons of duties to your kids and to your wife and to your community, even locally. You know that, right? It doesn't even have to be spoken about. But for some reason, when it's applied socially, we just dismiss it. We're like, it's all about entitlement. It's all about entitlement. It's all about entitlement. It's not.
I would
have
read
social duties.
There's an answer to that question and we'll wrap with this because I could talk to you all day and my producer is saying we got to wrap because
okay.
but I could do this all day.
Yeah, I enjoy it. I've always enjoyed coming on.
I love it. So Jonathan Haidt in his book, The Righteous Mind, would say that your social obligation, a liberal would say my social obligation is to make sure it's fair and does no harm. A conservative has a broader moral palette, which is not just does it do harm and is it fair, but there's something called sanctity, there's something called respect for authority, and there's loyalty. And those are also things. So patriotism is a form of loyalty. You get a lot from this country, whether you know it or not, and it behooves you to know what you get and know what you would be missing if you lived in another country, which is what makes me such a patriot. I lived in all over the world, and I know.
I would just add the one qualifier that all Christians universally have a duty to resist evil. A duty to resist evil. And so when you ask the question, what if I want to be a rock star and come in and sniff cocaine off of a woman's fucking boobs in a dress, right? Isn't that my God-given right? It's like, no, it's not. And I think that Christians universally can resist that by saying that's demonisis and we're going to resist evil. That is a core foundational principle that we've forgotten. We're supposed to resist evil.
I think it was Paul who said temptation and evil is like a roaring lion, always circling. It's always there. The apple's always there. You always want to take a nibble, at least a little nibble. And I'll quote Jordan Peterson. I think about this all the time.
Including us. We do. You and I.
100%.
You and I do.
I might be the worst. It's a constant. I'm constantly white knuckling. But
that's why we say in orthodoxy, chief of sinners. Right here, chief of sinners. The chief.
You can sniff cocaine off the vagina of a lady or whatever. It's not going to work out though. And Jordan Peterson said, in my 35 years of being a psychoanalyst, I've never seen anyone get away with even one thing even once. At the end of the day, you're going to twist the fabric of reality. But when the shit hits the fan, I'm going to be able to trace it all the way back to this decision you made when you tried to take a shortcut. And if I could go back in time and talk to myself, I would have said, Bryan, you're not going to get away with a fucking thing even once. You'll pay in full for what you have done and what you haven't done. And especially what you haven't done. Work
with
harder.
Interest.
With interest. Tell the fucking truth all the way across the board. And do what's hard. Do what you're supposed to, not what you want to. Good luck with that, by the way. Good luck with that. But hey, that's probably my argument for at least the things that you are behind, which would be Christian ethics. I think it'll work out for you in a better way. Doesn't mean we shouldn't be creative though, and a little bit naughty. Andrew Wilson, as always, Great to see your beard. Great to see some color in your
That's
face.
right.
Looks like you're working out. Your shoulders are looking a little more rounded.
We're
Your
getting
traps, your neck. I'm impressed.
We're getting there, man. We're getting there.
Yes,
and thank
yeah.
you so much for having me on, Brian.
Dude,
I really appreciate it.
You have a standing invite. I love having you on anytime you want.